Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. Here I am in Moscow, as you can possibly guess. That is the Kremlin behind me. It means fortress. So several cities in Russia have something called the Kremlin, and one might call this one the Moscow Kremlin, just to avoid any confusion. If people simply say the Kremlin, we know which one they're talking about. It's become a synodoche, and people use this word simply to mean the Russian state. So it's about 3 miles in circumference. The walls is roughly triangular in shape, so each side being about a mile long. And there's this Alexandrovsky sad, as in garden, right here. I can only show you a little bit of it. That's named after Tsar Alexander I. And if I go right over here, you see that walkway up to the Kremlin. On the other side of that, the garden carries on. So there are many towers. There are about 16 towers, I've got that right, all around the walls of the Kremlin. They've all got different names, like Arsenal Tower, Saviour Tower, and so forth. And there are many enormous buildings within that complex. So the Kremlin's a compound. There's the Senate building. There are various palaces. There's a cathedral. There's that Ivan the Terrible bell tower with the fallen broken bell. I've only been in there once, actually, in 1994. Must go back in. So it's open to tourists, and if you're a foreigner, you pay a higher price than a Russian citizen. And this is the walkway that you go up to get in there. But you had to go to the ticket office, which is the other side of that walkway. You can't see it from this angle. I've deliberately chosen to film the Kremlin from an angle which is not usually seen. People usually film it on Red Square because it abuts onto Red Square. So it's a fortress that goes back almost to the foundation of Moscow, well over 800 years ago, but obviously it's been expanded and renovated very extensively in that time. In 1812, the French invaded under Napoleon. Napoleon had soldiers from many other European countries, and the Russian general Alexander Kutuzov ordered his men to retreat, followed a scorched earth policy. So when Napoleon got to Moscow, there wasn't very much for him in the way of provisions, and he stayed in the Kremlin for a few weeks. He ordered it to be blown up, but it wasn't done in the end. They decided they didn't have enough gunpowder, needed what they had to retreat with them. So the Kremlin was saved, and then the capital of Russia at the time was obviously St. Petersburg, but when the Tsar came to Moscow, which is frequently, quite often he stayed here, and many state ceremonies were held here, particularly Nicholas II, who was a more traditional-minded sort of person, and this seemed to be more of the capital of Russia to him than St. Petersburg, as it was more historic. And then in the Soviet era, a lot of the Soviet leadership lived in there. Stalin, for example, lived in part of it. He often went to his dacha in Kuntsevo, which is a bit out to the west. And even not Napoleon, even Lenin spent some time in here. After Stalin, I don't think any of the top Soviet leadership lived in here, though there are offices for the president, the prime minister in there. Obviously, those areas are off limits. Now, where is it? The enormous red ruby on the top of this tower. Not sure if you can see it. Don't have zoom on this. But when I first visited '94, I was told that is solid ruby, that red star. I don't know if that's true, but they've changed the emblems a lot. A lot of the communist era symbols have been replaced, and the double-headed eagle of the Tsarist era has been put back in many cases, and they've only done that in the last few years. The eagles have individual crowns, and they're sharing a crown as well. So that's enough at the moment from the Moscow Kremlin.